It is? Okay, it's on now. Okay, very good. Happy Sabbath, everyone. Rather than being in front of the pulpit here, I'd like to be a little closer to you without falling off the stage. I have been to many churches, and when I look at the clock, I have about 5 minutes left. But it's okay today? Did you know that if you actually fast for more than 16 hours, so basically if your last meal was about 6 o'clock last night or yesterday evening, and you fasted for Sabbath breakfast, usual breakfast, your body is actually in more active healing than actually having had a traditional breakfast. And this actually was completely established by 2016, about 3 years ago, by a Nobel Prize winner. And so it's not a fad, but it's actually a scientific fact. So breakfast, we usually associate it with an early morning eating, but it's just breaking fast. So it doesn't say when you have to break the fast. So especially on a Sabbath day like this, when you want to be concentrating and focusing and being in tune with the heaven above, it may be a very good idea to fast. Actually, I fast all the way until every single day, and my breakfast is actually about 12:30 or 1. And actually, I've had some amazing transformational experience, which I can get into probably in another setting. But today, I wanted to share with you about the central theme of what wholeness is in light of the scientific finding, the medicine. But today's model that I'm going to share with you is cancer lessons. Cancer, because cancer is one of the most dreaded diseases. Does this bother you a little bit? I don't know. It might be my raspy voice. Okay, very good. Thank you. I just did not want this to interfere with your focus. And on the bottom, I called it a living sacrifice. For the last almost about 30 years, I have been studying science and medicine, and every time I find something new that I learn from science and medicine, I actually go back to the Bible. Let me see. Maybe I can. Okay. So whenever I actually learn something new from science or medicine, I always go back to the original, the book, the Bible, and see if what the Bible had to say about what scientists or human beings just recently happened to discover. Because there's nothing new under the sun, right? That doesn't mean that we cannot make progress. But our progress is nothing but getting closer to the principle by which we were created. So with that in mind, I'd like to once again read our scripture reading, and I'll be reading together with you from NIV, New International Version, because it's more politically and socially correct because it's all inclusive. So let's read it together one more time, all together. Ready? Go. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of the mind. And then we skip to the last verse. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Amen? I come from one of these blue zones, and there are 5 blue zones, but the top 3 blue zones in this world are 3 places. What are the top 3 blue zones? Sardinia, Italy, Okinawa, Japan, and Loma Linda, California. What do I mean by blue zone? Yeah, place 3 areas of the world where people live long, but not only live a long time, but very healthy. And scientists actually found out that there are 3 common things that actually are shared by the blue zones. Number 1 is the type of diet. Number 2 is exercise. And number 3 is community. And actually, this is a reporter and an explorer, Dan Buettner from National Geographic. He actually had this question in mind because all the major places of longevity, their longevity rate has been steadily declining. Except where? Except Loma Linda. It's not the most beautiful place. But there's something different about this place. And Dan Buettner from National Geographic said, why is this happening? What do you think was the answer? The answer that he said, if you actually go to his article, if you can Google and go to Dan Buettner's article, he will say that it's a Sabbath faith community. Did you know that? He said it himself. It wasn't us talking about it. He said it himself. And this is something that I'm very excited about because as Pastor Darren mentioned, I'd like to be called medical evangelist. I don't want to say I'm a big evangelist, but I want to share the good news that we learn from the sciences, but it's already written in the book in different language. So when I actually talk to you about the language of science, today I'm going to talk to you a lot about cancer and our lifestyle choices that can reverse cancer. I would like to think of those scientific terms, but those scientific terms actually have something that actually remind us about who our Creator is. Did you know the Bible text that we got, the wholeness, was actually Luke 2:52? You know, the motto of Loma Linda University School of Medicine, or Loma Linda University, is to make man, and then politically correct, man and women whole, okay? To make people whole. And that concept came from Luke 2:52. And let's read this just so that we can be all on the same page, okay? Let's all read it together. Luke 2:52. Ready? Begin. And Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and men. There are 4 aspects that Jesus Christ's example gives us in terms of wholeness. And that's where Loma Linda University got their motto. Because wisdom has to do with mental health, stature has to do with physical, bodily health, and being in favor with God has to do with spiritual, and with men has to do with social. So these are the dimensions of health that everyone needs. And based on this, I want to talk to you about some lessons from cancer. Now, do you recognize this person? This is Mrs. Jatan, and actually I had a privilege of interviewing her, and she was actually exercising and lecturing and just such a model. And even National Geographic came to her to see what kind of lifestyle really made her who she was. Now, having gone through all this, I just wanted to kind of share with you what I actually experienced at Harvard, because one of my subspecialty is obesity medicine, and at the final stage of my fellowship, I had a great experience at Harvard with this professor. And when I actually asked him to actually come overseas, actually I was made in Korea, even though I pretty much grew up here most of my life. And there was an Asian Lifestyle Association, and there's one in the Philippines and one based in Korea and Taiwan and so forth, and I was invited as a speaker, and I wanted to bring someone along, and his name is Dr. Philip that you see in the back here next to me. And I asked him, hey, do you want to come over to Korea with me to actually promote this lifestyle medicine? And he goes, well, he said, aren't you, meaning Loma Linda, aren't you 100 years ahead of Harvard? Why do you need us? Or why do you need me? And I was very surprised, coming from Harvard, they think they're the best, right? But they actually were able to, or he was actually able to credit correctly. And I was very proud in a spiritual sense that, hey, there's people out there that actually know what Loma Linda stands for. So I would like you to remember our heritage as well. Not that Loma Linda location, but our spiritual heritage. And so about 4 years ago, about this time, 4 years ago, actually this October 15th, I was able to go with him to this place called Samyuk University. That's actually a university where holistic lifestyle is taught on the whole campus. It's it's actually the biggest Adventist university in the world. And the Harvard professor was so surprised that there could be a whole university campus that actually have this holistic lifestyle perspective. And he actually, in this lecture, he actually promised that he wanted to do research along with the Korean Adventist with the Harvard, medical school to actually show that lifestyle makes a big difference. So there are a lot of things that are happening out there that we may not know, but we are 100 years ahead of Harvard thanks to the spirit of prophecy and thanks to our enlightenment. But we think very little of what we have. So I'd like you to challenge you to remember our heritage and kind of rekindle the spirit of wholeness. That Harvard is trying to catch up, but we actually are so complacent of what we have that we are actually kind of falling behind now, even though we were ahead 100 years ago. So that's something that we need to think about. So today, I have a question for you. What if you were diagnosed with cancer? What are some of the things that would go through your mind? If it's cold or flu, it says, oh, I need to sleep some, I need to drink some water, I need to take some vitamin C. But if you are diagnosed with cancer, if your loved one is diagnosed with cancer, you say, what did I do wrong, right? Or is there anybody in my family, or who has cancer in my family? Is it genetic? Am I destined? So cancer is a disease that think about the meaning of our existence, or that makes us think about our destiny, like the fate, right? Where am I going after this? Even though we are very spiritually inclined when we are healthy, when we are very sick, or when we are actually diagnosed with cancer, we think about, wow, what did I do wrong? Is it a punishment? So there's all kinds of struggle that goes through, and this disease can give you one of the biggest suffering or one of the biggest meaning in your life. And with that, I want to actually share with you a good news from NIH. NIH is short for National Institute of Health, and actually NIH gave a report as far as the cancer is concerned, the following report. Only 5 to 10% of cancer is attributable to genes, genetic. And 25% is attributable to environment, and the other 30% attributable to non-diet lifestyle choices. It could be exercise, it could be your stress. And then the most important thing, and the biggest, is obesity and diet, 35%. So when we talk about health, it's not just about food, but it is the biggest third of all the factors that we can think about. About 35% is bigger than a third of 100%, right? So that's something that I'm going to focus today, even though I started out with fasting, because if we go very close to 1 o'clock, you have a greater healing experience. So this could be your healing test and healing experience that you're going to have. So if your stomach growls a little bit, and if you feel like, oh, when's he going to finish? You can raise your hand, or you can actually go to the Korean section and eat, their potluck. But your healing will be a little bit, a little bit decremented. It'll actually have a slightly less healing that you're going to experience, especially if you had breakfast early on today. So fasting is actually really, really powerful modality that God gave us for healing. In the Bible, King James Version, there are about 56 mentioning of fasting, and every time somebody fasts, something amazing happens, especially with Jesus as well, right? And so fasting and prayer is an amazing power in and of itself. So before we talk about what to eat, I want to talk about how not to eat, the importance of not eating or emptying our body. So everything that I mentioned is actually can be considered family history. It's not just the genes, but how your family lived your life together is actually what's affecting how your gene or how your body is actually susceptible to disease like cancer. So you can go through your mind and say, what are the things that I have been exposed to all my life, whether it's the diet, exercise, or family habits, and then about 5 to 10% genetics that made me susceptible to cancer. Or if you don't have a diagnosis of cancer, thank God, but we develop cancer cells, about 500 to 1,000 cancer cells, or maybe more every single day. So what can we do in our daily life to reduce that chance? Because if you look at the actual statistics, only 90% to 95%, or actually up to 90 to 95% are changeable. Only 5 to 10% are genetic, and even genetic things actually may be changeable. So I wanted to start out with this agouti mouse. How many of you have you heard of agouti mouse? This is a mouse that generation after generation, these mice actually become obese. They develop diabetes as well as cancer. And why do we talk about this? Because if we want to live a more meaningful life, I'm not saying if you're sick you can't have a meaningful life, but sometimes if you're sick, you're focused on getting well to a point that we forget the greater picture of what God has in store for us. So we have to be physically fit to be able to focus on the spiritual things. So that's why I'm talking about the physical aspect, so that we can actually not worry about it and focus on the spiritual aspect. But these mice, they get obese, they become diabetic, and they can get cancer. And something can be done to these mice, that changes their health outcome. And there was something that was done, and the mice actually changed from obese like this to even different fur and different size and no disease. What happened to them? Have you heard what happened? Have you seen in the news? This was a big news for the past about 20 years in this field. What happened to these mice was that the scientists actually fed them 3 types of food. I don't know if you actually like beets, onions, and garlic. How many of you actually had beets, onions, and garlic recently? If you actually eat these 3 items, you can actually reverse the health outcome of your genes. So your genetic structure doesn't change, but your genetic expression can change. Isn't that good news? So how this occurs is this. If we actually open up our DNA that actually contains genes for cancer, for example, it looks like this. We have a DNA thread, and we have DNA spool, which is called histone. So this circular thing is called a histone, but it works like a spool. And DNA, the actual gene structure, can open up like the thread. So when the gene is opened up, unwrapped, that's when a gene gets expressed. So if it's a cancer gene and it's opened up, then what can happen? Cancer is expressed. But what happens if you wind it up and wrap it up? Even if the genetic structure is there, the gene cannot be expressed. And this is what happened. So when this is methyl group, and they look like popcorns, right? I think you guys like popcorn, right? The pastor mentioned about popcorn, but if you actually eat corn, not necessarily like a fried corn, but if you eat corn or if you eat vegetables, you actually have this methyl group attaching to the DNA thread, and this is what happens. It wraps it up. And when it's wrapped up, the DNA, the cancer DNA can become silent. Then what happens? Even if there is a cancer structure, genetic structure for cancer, the cancer can be suppressed and you don't express cancer. Then, even if you have the predisposition, like doctors say, if you don't have cancer all your life, if you don't develop cancer all your life, then you're fine, right? So that's what we're trying to do here. So this is kind of a complicated diagram that actually shows like this X represents the chromosome, and there are about 23 pairs, and then if you unwind and if you actually pull it out as a thread, it becomes basically a long strand of thread, and you know how long it is? It's so long that each DNA, even though you can't even see it, if you could actually measure it, it'd be about 6 feet long, like one tall person's height in one cell. But there are how many cells? 30 trillion cells in human body. And then how many bacteria? 39 trillion bacteria. So we're slightly more alien than human. Did you know that? We're carrying more bacteria than human cells. But 99% of the bacteria are actually very, very beneficial. God gave us micro-universe in our body that if we actually if we are balanced in our health, we do not get sick, and bacteria help us with so many processes. And so we actually are a little more bacteria than human cells, but of course the human mind, along with God's connection, control who we are. So if you actually look at if you connect all the DNA in our cells, all 30 trillion of them, how long it is this. This is actually recently calculated, and it actually, DNA in the human body is long enough to span twice across the solar system. You know, solar system is pretty wide, right? And you know, if you were actually going at a rate of 60 miles an hour, actually I calculated this last night. If you're traveling at 60 miles an hour, it would take 683,647 years to go across the solar system. 687,000 years. So if you actually had your DNA all connected, and if you were to travel by car, the whole span of the length of DNA, that's how long. That's how much DNA, the blueprint there is. Isn't God awesome? We are carrying that in our body. But every day we're actually, and then things are going smoothly as if, you know, there's so many things that can go wrong. Think about all the accidents that can happen, right, if you travel this far. But of all the things that can happen, you know, of course, people are getting sick all the time, but we're able to repair all the time too. And if you actually eat a nice steak like this, how many of you actually are hungry for a steak like this? If you had a steak like this, what do you think happens to the DNA thread? Does it get, the cancer thread, does it get wrapped or does it get unwrapped? Unwrapped. So if you eat healthy, your cancer DNA thread gets wrapped. If you eat a steak, it gets unwrapped. So it's your choice. So I never say don't do this, don't do that. This is a scientific fact and God's principle of health. And so you just make your choice and you have to live with the consequence. And so here is, now not only the reason why this can actually cause cancer, and I'm not saying that if you eat a steak you're going to get cancer, but increases the probability is because there's every time a meat is burned, you produce benzopyrene, which actually damages the DNA. Saturated fat clogs up your artery. And then there are amino acids that are protein building block that actually cause inflammation. So if you have arthritis, then you want to probably avoid meat, because if you eat a cup of bean versus an ounce of meat, even though they are protein, the animal protein can cause inflammation, but vegetable protein does not. And it's a scientific fact. So we were meant to eat vegetables, and medical science has proven Genesis chapter 1, verse 30, right? If you read Genesis chapter 1, verse 29 and 30, God says to eat the fruits and the vegetables, right? And do you know what I have a question for you. Do you know what the eagles and the worms ate in the Garden of Eden? The answer is in chapter 1, verse 30. If you have your Bible, look at it. It actually tells you what they ate. How about this one? Is this sumptuous, or is it appetizing, or it's about lunchtime now, so you can actually go for a steak? It's your choice. So cancer DNA thread can be unwrapped. So cancer cells start to accumulate, and when you accumulate about 100 million cancer cells, it becomes about 1/8 of an inch. That's when it becomes detectable. So there's a lot of grace period, and you need about 100 million cancer cells for it to be detectable. So it takes decades for you to actually develop cancer that are diagnosed. So when you said you have early cancer, and if it's localized, and you said, well, it's an early cancer, but from a cellular perspective, that's my specialty, it actually has been progressing for a long time, right? Even though just human beings just couldn't detect it until 10 years or 15 years later. But if you actually choose these three kinds of vegetables, so beet, onions, and garlic, you can actually reverse that genetic expression. Genetic structure doesn't change. Your cancer structure still exists, but you can actually prevent the cancer gene from being expressed. Isn't that a good news? Yeah. So this is the beet is a very, very strong methyl group donor, and that methyl group is that popcorn-looking thing that actually goes to the DNA thread, the cancer DNA thread, and it makes the thread to be wrapped around the spool so that it cannot be expressed. So think about all the vegetables now that I'm going to start to mention. So here's the beet dish you can try. And so let me review some of the benefits of beets. And it's just, if I talk about all the different fruits and vegetables, you actually have so much knowledge and wisdom about what to eat. But beet is actually something that I would like you to think about as part of your diet, because it donates a lot of methyl group to suppress especially the colon cancer. That's the third most common cancer. Breast cancer, colon cancer, even lung cancer, but colon cancer was the most well-studied research. It also provides folic acid to actually regenerate your cells. If you feel tired and if you feel like, do I need to drink coffee or do I need to drink some caffeine, you may not have enough folic acid in your system. But beet has plenty of that. Next, it's got beta-cyanine, which actually kills cancer cells. It's got chemotherapeutic agent inside the root. The fourth, it's got vitamin A, vitamin C, magnesium, calcium, and iron. And it's basically a multivitamin factory, all inside the root. And number 5, it prevents clots in your blood. Is your blood getting thicker? Have you had a stroke? Are you at risk of stroke? Consider adding beet to your diet. Next, it cleanses liver, gallbladder, as well as colon. So if you want to do a colon cleanse, don't buy one of those very, very expensive, hyped up commercial product. Eat natural beet from God. Next one, it gives energy because it's got sugar content without raising your sugar in a tremendous amount. So even if you're diabetic, if you eat beet along with some lemon and some garlic and some olive oil, your sugar will not go up that high. So consider adding beet to your diet today. But is that the only thing that God has given us? No, right? So I'm going to share with you a little bit more. But before that, I wanted to actually share with you a spiritual insight from this scientific finding. To me, when I look at something like this, I get goosebumps because it's so exciting. Because, this is a model, it's a physical model that describes what sanctification is. Right? Sanctification is about overcoming our sinful nature, right? Even though you became a Christian, even though you became born again, has our nature changed? Not yet, right? It's there all the time, right? It's there, ready to come out, our sinful nature. But when we get empowered by Jesus' methyl group, what happens to the genetic predisposition to sin? What does it become? It can become wrapped. So the genetic predisposition can become suppressed by being connected with God. And this is a medical mechanism that can describe how the spiritual sanctification occurs. Isn't that a good news? And 100 years ago, this was actually discovered and re-emphasized by the Adventist. Because for the longest time, you know that 2017 was the 500-year anniversary of Reformation. And I don't know how many of us actually really kind of thought about it, but, very good, very good. Because of the legalism of, our previous, Christian forefathers, there has been Protestants and many different Reformations. And finally, we're like the youngest. I usually share, when I go to the Catholic Church, I always say we're the youngest addition to the God's family. And of course, we have our Adventist interpretation of the Revelation 14 and so forth. But when we are actually talking about the Christian community, it would be a good idea for us to say, hey, we're the youngest edition that has had the most upgrade. That's what I tell them, because we do. We have a historic proof of 100 years of upgrade, right? And basically, I talked to them about how it was ignored. God's principles were ignored in the name of grace. Because in the name of grace, we can do anything and God will automatically forgive and automatically do things for us. And of course, God has heart to do that. But unless we follow the principles, it does not happen in our body. And that's what the physical scientific findings actually teach us. Because our mind, our brain is a physical thing too, right? And unless we actually make active choice with the help of the Holy Spirit, our physical and mental changes do not occur. And it starts with changing our lifestyle, right? Giving our body as a living sacrifice as we make daily decisions. And it starts with something as simple as making the choice of what to eat, right? Because it makes a difference. Actually, you can do an experiment. If you eat a steak or a lot of French fries or sugar, what happens to your mind? Let's say you're studying for an exam, like Pathfinders, and let's say, I want to go to McDonald's and I want to have my cheeseburger, right? And you pray really hard at McDonald's and then eat a cheeseburger. What happens to your mind? You're trying to study for an exam. Very cloudy. You can actually do that experience. So then will God, just because He loves you, will God reverse that cloudiness because He loves you? If He did that, He would not be a God of justice, right? Right? God actually is God of grace because He taught us the principles now. And only thing that we have to do is follow the principles and it will happen. But if we don't follow the principles, then God cannot force the McDonald's meat turn into beet, right? He can, but if He does that at will, then this universal order would be not sustained, right? So I'm Korean, but I have this Chinese medical school professor who actually is a Loma Linda, father of epigenetics. He was actually the researcher on garlic and how garlic reversed cancer cells, so that cancer cells actually can become normal. And after about 30 years, he actually found me and said, "Hey, I just found you on the internet," without knowing that I was his student. He said, "Hey, I was looking for a doctor who actually knew about this epigenetics, how our lifestyle can change the genetic expression. And because you have this knowledge, I actually chose you as my doctor." And he comes to my clinic, and it was a pleasant surprise. 30 years ago, he was my professor, and I was learning from him. And now he wanted to come and be treated by me because of this lifestyle choices. And his wife is an amazing cook for anti-cancer recipes. So I just wanted to kind of get their name out there just in case you're interested in some. I have some principles, but she actually has a cookbook for cancer. So do we just eat a bunch of beetroots? Is that what we do? No, God actually has given us so much more. So within the next few minutes, I want to share with you some of the blessings that we can share together. This is actually a scientific research that actually studied anti-proliferative and antioxidant activities of common vegetables. It's like a bunch of mouthful, but it just means like normal food, normal common vegetables can suppress cancer cells. And let's see what kind of cancer cells normal food that we can come across every single day can help us get rid of cancer cells. So number one, it's a rainbow-colored food. How many of you when you think about food, do you think about the name of food or do you think about color of food? Usually you say, "Oh, I wanna have spaghetti today," or "Oh, I wanna have a baked potato," or "I wanna have." How many of you say, "I wanna have some broccoli"? Usually you name the name of the food, right? But starting now, I would like to have you start thinking about the colors when you actually think about food, because these rainbow-colored food actually give you the message of hope, not just the message, but the healing. So in the rainbow color spectrum, there is a healing property. And every single color that you see, from the plant or fruit that you can eat, there is a healing power called antioxidation. Antioxidation means it can reverse aging process, it can reverse arthritis, it can reverse your cancer activities. So if you're regularly eating things that are antioxidant, then you can actually prevent yourself from getting sick. And when you get sick, you get more focused on your illness rather than on your neighbor, rather than on your family and God. So the main reason why we have to be physically healthy is so that we can focus on our relationship with our loved one and God. That should be the health message. Not just to live 7 to 10 years longer. What is the point of that if you're going to live eternity, right? I always talk about a fly that lives, there's a gnat that lives only at 24 hours. And if a gnat gets a cancer, diagnosed with cancer on the 17th hour and struggling with cancer, what do we think about? It's like in the big scheme of things, it's not very big. It's not a big deal, right? So 70 years in light of eternity is nothing. Of course, when you're suffering from cancer, we suffer with you. We empathize. But at the same time, we need to look at the big picture. So look at these colors. Red color actually has all the things that actually help you with the heart, blood vessels. Red for blood vessel. Not too hard to remember, right? And orange specifically has to do with your health of your eye. And then green has a lot to do with your health by maintaining healthy cells and preventing it from getting cancer. And then blue, indigo, violet is all around healthy cells. So of course, every single rainbow color can be an antioxidant for every single aspect of health, but that's kind of how you can think about it. So every color is something that you want to choose in your life. And yellow actually is it's limonene. It's got lutein, limonene, and curcumin. Those are the 3 antioxidants that you can think about. And these actually are very, very powerful anti-arthritic arthritic foods. So if you actually have arthritis and even tumors in your colon, curcumin, actually found in curry, it's close to yellow, right? Actually can reverse some of the polyps that are found in your colon. So like when you're over 50, you get a colonoscopy, and if doctors find polyps, that's precancerous, then you have to get them removed every so often, every 3 to 5 years. And then if you get cancer, then they say, well, you may need surgery or chemotherapy, but you can do natural, God-given chemotherapy every single day. And you will not have the cells accumulate that big enough to be diagnosed. And I included black as at the bottom of rainbow colors, because when you mix all the rainbow colors of paint, what do you get? You get black. And black actually color, so black beans, I have black beans, blackberries. Actually, black raspberry is actually one of the most powerful anti-cancer agents that you can find. So black is a great color as well if it's natural vegetables and plants. And also, one color that I missed at the very top is what? It's not a rainbow color, but if you mix all the light colors, what do you get? You get white. And white usually actually helps with your digestive system. So if you, except for white rice, white sugar, and white flour, if you choose everything else white, so you have white what? Radish is white, you have white cauliflower. Cauliflower is one of the strongest antioxidants. And also, what's white? Garlic is white. There are onions that's white. So I'm going to get into a little more of that in a rapid succession. This is what I eat every single day as part of one of my meals. So if my breakfast is around 12, this is what I eat. And then for the second meal, I add a little bit more beans, different types of, sometimes I add a little bit of noodle. And when I want to eat some noodles or rice, I just look at my palm and I eat half of my palm size. Because the more carbohydrate you have, less healing you have in your life. Carbohydrate is very important, but we tend to overeat carbohydrate. That actually prevents healing process. So this is rainbow colors, and it's got all the rainbow colors plus some nuts. And it's kind of small, but if you look at this, this is actually lung cancer. Look, garlic, leek, green onion, Brussels sprouts, kale, cabbage, beetroot, spinach, cauliflower is right there. So I'm just going to go a little rapidly, but every single time you'll discover the same kind of food that are very, very strong in suppressing all kinds of cancer. So this is lung cancer. And then next one is breast cancer. Same thing, garlic, leek, green onions, and so forth. You can probably take a picture and then you can enlarge it and you can see all the great foods that actually suppress cancer cells every single day. And so this is something that you want to add to your menu if you want to actually regularly suppress cancer. Next one is prostate cancer. The most common cancer among men after lung cancer, prostate. Breast cancer is most common after lung cancer for women. So I'm just going by the most common cancers. As you can see, prostate cancer is very responsive to all kinds of vegetables, but garlic, Brussels sprouts, green onions, leek, broccoli, cauliflower right at the top. And so that would be a recipe. And the next one is stomach cancer. Stomach cancer, same thing. Garlic, leek, green onions, yellow onions, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower. Next one, I have pancreatic carcinoma. That's upon diagnosis, people only have 3 to 6 months to live. And this is, once again here, garlic, leek, Brussels sprouts, green onions, yellow onion, kale, broccoli, beetroot. So these are actually, research after research, these actually suppress cancer cells without taking a very toxic chemotherapy. And the next one I have is glioblastoma. This is a very, it's not common, but when you get the cancer of the brain from when you actually get a little older, it's a very devastating disease, but this can be also prevented. Once again, garlic, leek, Brussels sprouts, and so forth. Same list. Next one is actually cancer among the young generation. Younger children can get medulloblastoma. They lose balance, they get dizzy, they vomit, and it's a very horrible cancer for younger kids. And this can be prevented again with garlic, leek, onions, and about the same list. Time after time, it's not just the beets, but you have all kinds of rainbow-colored vegetables that are actually natural antioxidants. Not only actually kill cancer cells, but they reverse aging as well. And so these are the things that are so numerous. And I don't know if you ever tasted Brussels sprouts that are really, really good. Usually Brussels sprouts, broccoli, cauliflower, it's something that you take just one at a time. But if you eat a plate every single day of combination, you're going to be so much healthier. And so this is kidney cancer, same thing. And if I keep going, these are all the research that actually supports, but because of the time factor, I'm going to go right to garlic. Garlic is white, right? And this is the strongest anti-cancer agent that God has given us. And when it becomes activated, it's called allicin. So there's allicin that's in garlic that becomes activated. And it becomes activated when allicin, it's an enzyme that converts allicin to allicin. And when does allicin get activated? Do you know? When garlic is crushed. And when I actually found this research, I found, wow, there's a huge spiritual lesson, because everything that I look at, I feel there is a spiritual lesson, and I feel like this is what Christ did for us. When his body was crushed, he actually gave us salvation. Just like when garlic is crushed, garlic gives us salvation from cancer cells. So there's that analogy, right? And when this garlic is crushed and left for 10 minutes, you can actually boil it and it won't get destroyed. You know how when you cook most of your vegetables, they actually tend to become, their antioxidant power tend to become reduced. But garlic can actually maintain its strength once it's crushed and left for about 10 minutes. So that's actually a very, very interesting finding, right? And then when you cook it, you lose the smell, and then the allicin turns into S-allylcysteine. Of course, only medical students have to memorize this. You don't have to memorize it. You just have to understand that you can cook it, you can crush it. Garlic is always helpful. That's the message. And this one does not smell, and it still has anti-cancer power. But did you know that there's something even more powerful than this garlic? Even though garlic is the most powerful food, there's something even more powerful than garlic, and that's what I want to end today with. There is a law of health that is more important than garlic, and I actually want to share with you this Chinese character. I'm Korean, but I love Chinese character because Chinese, how many of any Chinese in the audience? Chinese characters actually have huge spiritual lesson, because a lot of the Bible stories are built into Chinese character. And look at this. This actually means law, and whenever we think about law or legalism, we have a negative concept, right? We feel like we are afraid of law, right? The word legalism, we're deathly afraid of, right? Because we're called legalists and this and that. But in Chinese, the law has to do with very interesting concept. The three dots on the left actually represent water. And this whole character on the right represent to walk or to go. So law means to go like water or to move like water naturally. It's not about being forced to keep. It's about naturally flowing like water. That's how law is supposed to be. That's how law of God is supposed to be kept. Naturally, flowingly. And when it's kept, we receive all the benefits. So that's why I love Chinese character. And if you actually go further into this character that means walk, this symbolizes a person standing in a form of cross like this. and that means earth or soil. This part means earth or soil, and this part means self. So when your self is actually spreading your arms wide open in the form of cross, so when you're constantly thinking about cross, you find who you are. You find yourself. And then you have to, you know who you are, and you walk like Christ. And that's what law is. And so this is amazing, right? So this means flow like water to live. But what happens if water is stagnant? It rots and things die. Here's a twin study. One of the most interesting study in scientific community is twin study because they have identical DNA. But one twin can have one problem and another twin can have no problem. And this was the case in this situation. This gentleman on the left actually had stomach cancer and had surgery. His brother, who had the exact same DNA, did not develop any cancer. What is something that they had that was so much more significantly important than eating garlic? They ate garlic too, but they both ate garlic, but one of them got cancer and the other one didn't. What was that critical lifestyle choice that the other person made? So once again, scar, no scar. So they did some scientific study, and without going into the details, the conclusion is this. So when they were 3 years of age, their DNA expression, gene expression was identical, whereas after about 50 years, their genetic expression changed, just like the mouse that we talked about, the agouti mice whose genetic expression changed. So they were destined genetically to get cancer or obesity or diabetes, but they were able to reverse that. And similar thing happened here. And the one answer that the twin that did not have stomach cancer said was, I always lived a life of openness. This is the mindfulness that I mentioned in the sermon title, the mindfulness aspect. What is this mindfulness that we need to be focused on? There are 3 things that he mentioned, and he actually obviously was not a Christian, but these are the 3 things that he mentioned, and this is how he lived his life. He said he lived his life saying, in spite of. So in spite of all the trouble, in spite of all the negative things, in spite of all the hardships, I will do this. So in spite of is a phrase that he always used, and he was always having a positive attitude. Next one, he says, stress is an opportunity to grow. How many of you think of stress as a good thing? It's an opportunity to grow. How many of you say, yay, I have stress? But he did that. And then finally, he said, at one-ment and mutual life. He said he always wanted to promote a life of harmony and life of win-win. So I actually use the term at one-ment and mutual life to directly translate this Chinese characters. This actually means harmony, and this means mutual life. So if you live a life of harmony and mutual life, what do you do to the stomach cancer gene? You actually wrap up the stomach cancer gene and prevent it from being expressed. Isn't that amazing? And so these are the 3 things that you can think about and that you need to be mindful of as you live your life. It's not just about what you eat. It's not about how much exercise you do. It's about how you think and how you're connected. And this is actually, if you think about it, if you look at Romans 12, the last verse 21, how do you actually forgive your enemy, and how do you overcome evil with good? By thinking win-win. By thinking, how can both my enemy and me survive? How can we both live harmoniously? If you actually think about that and pray about that, rather than having that emotional outburst that gives you stress and that unwraps your cancer gene, you can actually wrap your cancer gene by planning on having a healthy, harmonious life. So you become very creative. And to become creative, you need to ask for God's wisdom, right? The wisdom from God, from heaven. So that because invariably you can have difference of opinion, and invariably you can have an enemy-like person in your life, right? But if you actually say, how can we live harmoniously? God, can you give me wisdom? Then your anger subsides and your emotional outbursts can subside, and you can actually reverse even cancer cells from developing. So this is something that I would like to share. So, atonement is actually a big theological term, but if you break it up as at-one-ment, it makes more sense to me. Atonement, of course, crucifixion, reconciliation, it's a big theological term. But at-one-ment is being at one with your neighbor and being at one with God. Isn't that easy to understand, right? That's harmony. Then your unwrapped cancer gene can be rewrapped and prevented from being expressed. Final Chinese character lesson here. This character means righteousness. Pretty complicated, right? It looks pretty complicated, but this is about 4,000-year-old Chinese character, and this whole character means righteousness, but the top part means lamb, and bottom part means self. So if you put lamb over self, you become righteous. Wow, don't you get goosebumps? Because without the biblical understanding, there's no way to interpret this. If you actually go to a Chinese origin dictionary, it'll say it is right to actually protect your lamb. And I actually went to Chinese history if they were actually keeping lamb or sheep sheep herding at that time. They were actually keeping ducks and pigs, not sheep. So this came from from a common story. And what is that common story? If you go further with this character self, the left side has to do with hand, right side has to do with spear. So our self is made up of hand with spear inside the hand. So we're always ready to pierce our enemy. So when I actually looked at this Chinese character and broke this down, immediately one Bible verse came to my mind. And I actually preached this to the communists about 20 years ago, 1999. I went to communist China and said, your Chinese character is so biblical. I'm not talking about Bible, I'm not talking about prayer, I'm not asking you to believe in God, but because obviously you can't even use the word God, actually. I said higher power, I think, or wisdom or something. And I said, this Chinese character, means righteousness, but look at this. This is what it means. And then, if you look at old document called Isaiah, book of Isaiah, 53:5, it says, he was pierced for our transgression, and he was bruised for our iniquities, and with his stripes we are healed. And so your character perfectly matches Isaiah 53:5. And there was one communist leader, he says, well, what is that book called, the Bible? Maybe I should pick that up. Maybe there's something important there. So to me, this is like gospel, gospel in Chinese character, right? In one word, it actually captures the entire Bible. And I shared with them this story. This is an Indonesian father and son. As you can see, the father is missing his left arm and his leg, but is still gently washing, his son's hair. But when Life, I don't know if you know a magazine called Life. Nowadays, everything is digital, so you can't pick up this magazine, Life. But this was featured in Life magazine. And this son was interviewed, like, why are you always looking upset? He goes, well, it's because when I go to school, my friends make fun of me because my father is a cripple, is a handicap. And so one day, he actually confronted his father and saying, why are you always begging, and why are we like this? Why are you like this? And the father said, son, let me tell you a story. And he sat him down. He said, when you were very little, and when you were a toddler barely walking, you stepped on a mine. It's a bomb that's ready to blow up when you step on it and unstep. And so right before it blew up, I had to push you out of the way, and I actually got hit by the bomb. And I'm so thankful that I saved my life, but that's why I'm I lost my arm and a leg. And after the son heard that story, the tears started rolling down his cheek, and he said, Daddy, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. And so after he heard the story, he went to school and he was telling everybody about what his father did for him. And now they're so happy. They said, all we have is this piece of cloth. We're just always just homeless. But if God is there, God would be just like my dad. And this is the gospel that I share with everyone as I go around the world. It's not just about eating garlic, but it's about meeting Christ. Because in Romans 5:8, he says, but God demonstrated his own love for us in this. While we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. So this is the gospel that we do not want to forget as we think about our holistic lifestyle. And so this is the health message, health evangelism in a nutshell. So let's praise God for his sacrifice, and let's remember how his body was crushed so we could live. Amen. Amen.